Thank you, High Commissioner. I really love the juxtaposition that human rights needs innovation and innovation needs human rights. It grounds us, it steadies us because, yes, we must move forward in this digital age. We have no choice, but we cannot move forward if we fail to anchor innovation in dignity, in accountability, and in the unwavering protection of people. The future is clearly on your mind, High Commissioner. We want to spend a bit more time with you on that topic. To do so, I would like to invite Dharisha Indraguptha from the UN Human Rights Office and a former journalist to sit with you and prop your thinking a bit. Please join us on stage, Dharisha. While she comes up, let's recall that this year's Human Rights Day campaign, Everyday Essential, highlights that the rights aren't distant principles. They are what make every life possible. Whether it is freedom of expression or access to information, this essential must be protected in every digital space, every technological choice we make. Over to you, Dharisha. But I would also want to invite those who are standing to come join us. There's a bit of spaces here. You can come join us. Thank you. Yes, there are seats here.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, High Commissioner, for those opening reflections and for setting the tone for our very first RightsX Summit. We have more than 800 people joining us today here in Geneva and online from every region of the world to reimagine how we advance human rights in a rapidly changing digital era. Over the next 20 minutes, we will move into a conversation with the High Commissioner. This is meant to be an open dialogue, and we welcome questions from both the room and our online audience. I will start off. High Commissioner, you've spoken deeply about how technology is reshaping power and civic space in these profound ways. So if I can start us off, when you look at today's landscape, and what do you perceive are the greatest risks and the greatest opportunities for human rights in this digital era?
No, I mean, I think one of the big issues that I think we are all facing is that, and it goes back to an image, and I bring it back the past as well, there was a German writer, Goethe, who wrote a poem about the sorcerer's apprentice. I don't know if you know that poem. If you haven't read it, I would really recommend you read it, because it is a bit what I think is happening today. So you unleash something, the genie gets out of the bottle, but how do you deal with the genie once it gets out of the bottle? And in this case, it's the sorcerer comes back because the apprentice does something that unleashes, if you like, pretty much a disaster, flooding in this case, and can't control it anymore, so it becomes uncontrollable, and then as a result, the sorcerer comes back and rescues it through a magic formula. Well, the magic formula is human rights, because human rights is, as I said, it brings us back to human beings. It brings us back to our relationship with each other. It brings us back to our relationship with power dynamics, including in this case the state, but also if other actors exercise power, it also tries to say, well, there are certain things that everyone needs to respect. And it brings us back also to our relationship with the environment. And it is, if you like, a constitutional order that not only influences, if you like, and that's where the opportunities come in, because it's a vision of the world where everyone wants to seek to thrive and flourish. And that's what human rights represent. So if we look at economic systems, if I look at Mariana Mazzucato's mission economy, I always wish we could use the mission and fill it with the human rights content. And I think that's exactly also for technological developments. And we have had a lot of discussions. I was with Peggy last year in Silicon Valley. We had a lot of discussions with different individuals who are currently at the forefront of technological developments. And we kept asking them, okay, what are your risk frameworks? And are they only about safety and security, or are they also looking at the broader human rights framework, which is this relationship that I've just mentioned? So the risk side and the harmful side, if you want a guardrail, then you can human rights and as a very important compass, and a compass that not only puts the guardrails and the constraints on the exercise of power, but that also inspires, and precisely as we are saying with 30 plus 30 plus 30, we want to do something good that actually helps innovate and bring communities together and find solutions to our biggest problems. But the guide is that, both in terms of what it can offer to us, but also in by way of putting guardrails on precisely this exercise of power. And this is in particular when it comes to those who develop and use, well, it's more in the development and design and development phase, where we sometimes wonder that all those who develop on the technological front, because they actually know about human rights and they see it as their guide, because there often is that disconnect, because the regulators, the institutions, the states that want to do something about it, we will always lag behind. We will never be able to even do anything close to what those who are in it are able to do. So in a way, we want to capture the ones who design and develop, because they are the ones who break the glass ceiling, but they're also the ones who need to have the content that goes along with breaking the glass ceiling.
Thank you, High Commissioner, for that very interesting analogy of the genie in the bottle. We will turn to questions now from our participants, and we're hoping to alternate between questions here in the room and questions from those of them joining us online. So I'd ask for you to please introduce yourself briefly when you ask a question, and keep your question as concise as possible so that we can hear as many people as we can. Are there questions in the room? Yes, in the back.
Thank you for your remarks, High Commissioner. Thank you, Cynthia, for leading the first ever RightsX. I'm Gregory Tutton. I'm one of the diplomats in the diplomatic corps of the Order of Malta, but I also have AI companies at the ITU. I currently have 2 companies at the ITU. Mr. High Commissioner, when you say that you went to Silicon Valley and you thought through how human rights could act as guardrails, to what extent can human rights also be reflected in technology to be promotional? So it's not simply protective, but promotional. The context for my question is the ways in which platforms typically have tried to avoid bias, but are we at a point now where we need to introduce human rights, because otherwise the biases that begin to emerge in technology actually are more often negative than positive? So how do human rights become a promotional guardrail that may be implicit, but could go to the ways in which we design technology? Thank you.
I think maybe one at a time.
Look, I think the promotional aspect is precisely the one that I mentioned through this mission economy concept, meaning that, I mean, Mariana Mazzucato, this very famous economist, thought that if, for example, we need to do the green transition, what combination of economic policies do you need to achieve this? Because it affects each and every aspect of policy of a state, or of a society. So it means, how do you bring together, when you identify what the mission is or what the objective or the purpose is, how do you then build a governance framework that addresses precisely that? I mean, green transition is, of course, a big thing. We need it desperately. The same you can use, and that's why the promotional aspect comes in. If we want to create a world where people are able to freely express themselves and be part of a creative space where they can not only, be part of innovation and agree to disagree, they also need to be able to do it in such an open and safe space that what we sometimes see, the old biases or the old powers of misogyny, patriarchy, are not allowed to thrive in the way that they are today, because the default is still there. And so you sort of say, okay, how do we then create, through digital technological developments, how do we create a space that allows people to thrive in a creative way and make sure that they can come together around, the discussion of a common good or of a public good, which we need, because we need creativity in order to address the challenges that we face. So it's, in a way, a vehicle, or human rights are a vehicle to use technology to achieve something. And let's not forget, and that's important, human rights are state obligations. These are obligations that state themselves not only crafted, but also accepted as guardrails for the exercise of power. But now that we have other entities exercising this power, how do we make sure, and there is, of course, the business and human rights aspect, but how do we make sure that this power does get exercised from a perspective of how to make the world a better place? And I mean, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a good aspiration for it. And you can go through each and every article and see how could we innovate so that we bring about that world, which was an aspiration. I mean, when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was crafted, it was an aspiration. Today we say it's law, and it is law, and it's binding law, but the aspiration is still there when it comes to economic, social aspects, when it comes to cultural aspects, when it comes to diversity, when it comes to the richness of the human family. And so I think you can give the content to the design of technological developments, and it's a good guide for that. So it's, if you like, the promotional aspect of it.
Thank you, High Commissioner. Do we have questions in the room? Otherwise, I will move to a question. We have quite a few online. So we'll move to a question from online. One of the participants asks, given the cross-border nature of digital harms, how can the UN encourage more accountability from tech companies that you spoke about, High Commissioner, whose moderation practices disproportionately impact vulnerable communities in conflict-affected regions?
I think one of our big discussions with the tech companies in Silicon Valley was precisely this. When you develop something, are you analyzing what that technological tool will do in different parts of the world, including those that are currently affected by conflict? I mean, if social media platforms, for example, do not have content moderation policies that are working, you can very quickly have, and we have seen it in Ethiopia and Myanmar, for example, it can quickly deteriorate to such an extent that hate speech and incitement to violence becomes rampant. And if it's not watched and properly worked through, it's precisely that. And so I always think that, because sometimes because we all, I mean, and that's the same with science more generally. I mean, whenever, there's a whole long debate about science and what scientists bring to the table, because of course they bring in their personalities, they bring in their, whoever they are, where they grew up, in what cultural context. But the world is a much bigger place than that, especially in many parts of the world. We have very different even models of thinking. And that, I think, is extremely important. I mean, we have the very crude one when we see that technological developments are very often based on a male model rather than one that takes into account women. And we have seen it not just when it comes to technology, that's when it comes to science even. So the old models and mentalities and frames of mind need to take into account, and that's where technology comes in, because it can eventually be embracing the diversity of the human family and the different contexts in which we work. So that's why we also need, you know, the digital compact that was adopted through the Pact for the Future was incredibly important. Now that there's a follow-up on, especially on AI, on the advisory board, but also on a governance framework, I think that actually we hope very much that the human rights framework is central to these discussions.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions in the room? We have many online, so I will go back there otherwise. But please raise your hand and we can see you. From Christina, who is a participant online, how can we ensure that we create adequate disruptive innovations that keep up with tech changes and secure human rights defenders? How can we invest meaningfully, and how will we create these solutions? The protection of human rights defenders specifically.
It is so important that there is a proper dialogue, and that's where the convening role also of the office comes in, that we bring human rights defenders into the room, that we analyze very specific situations, that we actually try to see, well, that's the co-creation thing. So what are the needs of a human rights defender who is working on preventing mega projects to affect indigenous populations, for example? And what does that human rights defender need specifically in order to do their work better? Or in conflict situations, I mean, the obvious ones, and I think there are quite a lot of examples out there. How do we use, I mean, Sudan is a good example. We have used satellite imagery in the analysis of what happened in Al-Fashar. But that's not the only thing. It's one source of verification in order to come to certain conclusions. I mean, and how do you capture that? And that satellite imagery is just one thing, but there are many other things. And I think the same with human rights defenders. It's so important to have this dialogue. I was in Brussels yesterday at an event where human rights defenders from all around the world came. And this is the space where we need to have this discussion so that the tech side understands where they are coming from, what they need, what the use case is, and define it together with them. I think that's going to be critical. Unfortunately, I have to rush to a press conference now, my end-of-year press conference. But I'd like to thank you all very much, and really also for your interest and for coming here and for participating with us and being part of this very exciting journey. Thank you.
Thank you, High Commissioner.